Welcome to the JB Font channel. I'm your host, James Fauntleroy. It's so good to see all of you here. The JB Font channel is also available on all major podcast platforms like Anchor, Apple, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, so you can subscribe to me there. I'm also part of the Revolutionary Blackout Network, so you can find me on the JB Show on Sundays at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, RBN Live on Tuesdays at 4, and the Savvy and JB Show on Thursdays at 6. Please make sure to give this video a thumbs up, and if you're new to the channel, please make sure to smash down that subscribe button and click the notification bell so that you're notified whenever new content goes up. I want to thank all the patrons on Patreon and Coffee for your contributions from the top and bottom of my heart, because without you guys, I literally would not be able to do this. So I deeply thank you, and I am humble and grateful for your contribution. Just to let you guys know, of course, this is going to be a reading for Dirty Truths by Michael Parenti. By the way, happy belated birthday to Michael Parenti. His birthday was yesterday. So we're going to be reading this, and we are starting on chapter 2, part 6. It is called Now for the Weather. So that's what we're going to be reading. This is interesting because it starts to talk about the dirty truth about weather and corporate media and reporting. This is going to be an interesting one. Of course, I got my ready here to read, and this is actually going to be very interesting to talk about because of course, one of Parenti's contemporaries was Noam Chomsky, and of course everybody knows Noam Chomsky for writing manufacturing consent. Noam Chomsky, in writing that, also reflects a lot of the same things that Michael Parenti has said, though the difference between Noam Chomsky is he's more of a we want to put guardrails on capitalism, while Michael Parenti says, you know what, screw capitalism, we need to get rid of it because it hurts everybody. The differences between them two. So it's kind of interesting to see the differences between Chomsky and Parenti in this respect. But there is an agreement and overlap of opinion when it comes to corporate media. So this is what we're going to be talking about, as well as the weather, as far as this is concerned. So, are you ready, kids? You ready to get reading? Let's go. All right, now for the weather. The media's most common method of distortion is omission. We're misled not only by what is reported, but by what is left unmentioned. This is true even with weather reports. Impending disaster. There are catastrophic things happening with the weather, one of which is ozone depletion. Damage to the Earth's protective ozone layer causes skin cancer, cataracts, crop damage, and climatic aberrations. Some 2.6 billion pounds of ozone depleting chemicals are emitted into the air every year. Some of the biggest polluters are military industrial contractors, who are also among the biggest TV advertisers. One of the worst, General Electric, owns NBC. Reminder, this book is 26 years old, so things have changed. Of course, the climate has actually gotten worse since then, and we know that the military industrial complex is one of the biggest polluters in the United States, as well as some of the top 100 companies contribute to over 70% of the global emissions that we have now. So it's actually gotten worse since then. Another potentially calamitous development is global warming. Auto exhaust, industrial air pollution, and other fossil fuel emissions act like a blanket to create and trap heat close to the Earth's surfaces, causing it to warm. Every day, the number of vehicles spewing emissions into the atmosphere increases. In 1950, the United States had 75% of the world's automobiles. Today, it has only 25%, even though the actual number of vehicles in this country has more than doubled in that period. Now, the car is everywhere in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, wreaking its devastation on the land, groundwater, and air. The 9 warmest years, average global temperature, ever recorded in the last century were during the last 15 years. Every year, in various cities and other locales, quote, record temperatures are announced. We have discovered that the Earth's capacity to absorb heat from energy consumption is limited. We face an ecological crisis whose momentous dimensions we are just beginning to grasp. One of the global warming, one effect of global warming is drought. From California to Vermont to England to Russia to New Zealand, unless reversed, drought leads to starvation, as Africa has been the first to know. When the evening news tells us, quote, what's happening with the weather, end quote, these potentially cataclysmic developments are not mentioned. Weather is defined in a limited way: cloudy and clear, cold and warm. The weather is reported the way politics is reported: isolated daily particulars unconnected to the larger structural forces that help create them. By the way, just to let you guys know, I know that there are some climatologists that say there's a difference between weather and climate. Weather is literally like the day-to-day happenings, within a given area atmospherically. Climate typically is the overall typical cycle, ebb and flow, you know, of various different weather patterns within a given period. So they notice a trend that happens within each year as the weather patterns change and tend to go warmer, or as we know now, what's called climate change. Basically, the warming of the earth and causing it to have, the melting of the polar ice caps, which increases the amount of water that we have within the oceans, that can cause the ocean sea levels to rise, thus putting different areas of the world in danger of us going underwater. And then on top of that, also having an increased risk of more stronger and more intense storms, like for instance the one that I just endured called Hurricane Ian. That was a category 4 when it hit Florida, and by the time it got to inland to central Florida, it hit me as a category 3, which I also documented here on this channel. Yeah. So back to the book. Sunny disinformation. Worse still, the ill effects of global warming and ozone depletion are actually celebrated by TV weather reporters who operate by an unwritten code. Sunny and warm are good, rainy and cold are bad. Weathercasters in various locales get absolutely rhapsodic over the strangely mild winters we have been having in recent years. They exult over the beautiful spring fever weather that now seems to come in December and January. We are told to, quote, get out there today and catch some of these lovely rays, end quote. Not a word about watching out for skin damage because of ozone depletion. Not a word about drought, or if drought is mentioned, not a word about global warming that's causing it, and not a word about the commercial industrial base and mode of vehicular transportation that are causing the global warming. Conversely, weathercasters frown when the weather is bad, when temperatures drop in January begins to resemble January. We're told the outlook is not good because rain threatens another winter with very little snow. That's good news, said one announcer. Good for all of us except you skiing fans. Forget that snow is a major source of our water supply, that it shields the chopped soil from the sun, helping to retain its sponginess. Forget that the scarcity of snow is making it increasingly difficult for forests in northern climates to renew themselves. In California, where a 6-year drought threatened to devastate the agribusiness, there was at least some belated awareness among the weather reporters that endless sunny days were not good news. But even there, the reportage was misleadingly upbeat. Thus, the rain that finally came to Northern California in early 1991 was cheerfully greeted as raising reservoir levels, with no acknowledgement of how dangerously insufficient such levels remain. And even after the rains filled the reservoirs, as happened in 1993 and 1994, and the water emergency was declared over, no mention was made that the state's water storage facilities, even at full capacity, were insufficient for growing population and business needs. In other words, the emergency was not over. On rare occasions, the threat of environmental catastrophe is obliquely acknowledged only to be denied. Thus, TV weathercasters, who usually never mention global warming, were quick to assert that the record breaking high temperatures for May 1991 in our nation's capital were not an inclination of global warming, since other parts of the country had been cooler than usual that same month and it all averaged out. What the weather people do not seem to understand is that temperature increase is only a part of the global warming problem. Even more ominous is the carbon dioxide buildup that causes such unusual weather aberrations as record storms, floods, hurricanes, and drought. Hot and sunny winter days in Seattle and San Francisco, snow in Los Angeles one day, and record freezing temperatures in Florida another. During the ABC weather report in Washington, D.C., October 5th, 1991, an announcer asked if the increasing number of days with temperatures over 90 degrees was indicative of global warming. The weathercaster replied, quote, "The record is too short. You got to look over hundreds of years to get a perspective," end quote. In effect, he was treating the question of global warming as untestable and unprovable in anyone's lifetime or any one era, leaving us with the soothing assumption that we have the luxury of hundreds of years to study the problem. The dirty truth is that every leading scientific body in the world now recognizes global warming to be a dangerous fact of life on this planet and that human causes are a major factor. During the Gulf War, bias in weather coverage showed forth in a new, unabashedly political way. As evening news reports began to feature aerial weather maps of the Gulf region, when skies were clear over Iraq, announcers would look pleased. When cloudy, they looked concerned. As one of them said, quote, "Is going to interfere with our airstrikes," end quote. Conservatives say that left critics deny, quote, "the autonomy of culture," end quote. Not true. Most of us recognize that culture does not operate in a perfect harmony with the dominant socioeconomic order. We understand that dissident cultural forces can arise and have a self generating impact. But when it comes to the kind of mass culture manufactured by the media, I want to plead guilty to the charge. There's little autonomy to speak of, be it entertainment, news, advertising, sports, or weather. It is all subject to various degrees of political bias, and no one is more political than those who instinctively know how to avoid politically troubling realities. So, this is going to be a very short one, but that is now for the weather. And it just goes to show, like, for instance, I shared on Twitter that there was this guy on CNN, and he had on a helmet and he was fighting against the wind during Hurricane Ian. And he's like, oh my God. And the camera's shaking and he's fighting against the wind. But then behind you, you see some dude just casually walking to his car to get into his car, not being blown by the wind, not shaking, going, oh, you know, just chilling, casually walking, opening up his car. The guy that was doing all the moving as if he was in some huge tempest of wind seemed less like a journalist and more like an actor. That's what they do. It's a sensationalization of weather events for news, or it's the downplaying of rain instead of seeing rain as a benefit to the given area to replenish, to soothe, to give a respite from the beating down of the sun all the time so that our plants can grow, we have water to drink, the animals have water to drink, and it cleans the air. It's always seen as, oh man, rain is threatening us, when really it should be something that's welcomed, because it is. Things are better after rain. Have you seen some brown grass and then after a good rain, it starts to turn green again? It's just better, right? I'm not saying to the point where it's flooding, but as a measured response, yeah. But unfortunately, they don't want to cover what's actually going on in regards to climate change. Because if they did, then that means that it would have to point to really the corporations that are causing all the emissions. Now, Parenti does point towards automobiles. While that in itself is bad, it's not necessarily pointing to the individual as saying you are the problem for having a car, but it's pointing towards a culture that we have, an individualistic culture that we always push to have a car instead of pushing for more mass public transit. See? We're constantly being pushed. Oh, we just need to have cars. But now it's to the point where it's like, oh, well, we just need to have more electric vehicles, right? We need to have more electric cars. Without realizing that, number one, it's still very individualistic. The manufacturing of tires, the manufacturing of ore for the different metals in the car, including for the lithium that would operate these electric vehicles, the copper wiring that's also needed for a lot of these electric vehicles, and the computer systems, that also requires a manufacturing and a mining and increasing the amount of emissions that we put into the air in order to obtain these things, in order to build all these different cars, versus it being more cost effective and more environmentally cost effective to just do more mass public transit. Would we still need lithium batteries, for maybe some of these trains? Well, maybe, yeah, for backup systems so that they can get their energy in case the energy grid shuts down. But, if you have, electrified um, conductors, for mass public, transit, for like high speed rail, then yeah, you really wouldn't need as much because you have batteries and metal and iron and iron ore used for steel to create steel, and you have that to build multiple trains with multiple cars that carry hundreds if not thousands of people, you know and you may have a few, let's say 10 trains that carry hundreds of people each way throughout the day, each week and each month throughout the year, versus each individual car out of thousands of people. It's actually more cost effective because you don't have to use all those resources in order to do that. So really it's the culture of individualism, the culture of you need your own car when really no you don't. Who's behind this? Well, it's, for instance, it's the Exxon Mobils, the BPs, that are behind this, because guess what? They want, to keep the fuel prices going, because they need that fuel price to keep going so that they can continuously make money. Then on top of it, you also have the auto companies that want to keep this going too, for you to have your own personal car so that they can keep selling you cars, because for the sake of profit. Then you have the insurance agencies, the auto insurance agencies. You have the ones like the General, you have the Geicos, you have the Allstates, you know, you have these different companies that also want to keep cars on the road. Why? Because it means their bottom line. Then you have the discount auto parts. You have the auto, you know, uh, auto zones. You have all these companies where they have car repair and things like that. Well, we need to keep ourselves profitable too. So this is why we need that to happen, which also kind of goes in lines with the planned obsolescence that happens with a lot of cars now. You know, and so when you have these, when you have more of a line of mass public transit, then and more of a lessening of car culture, it also means that you build cities around, more walkable areas for more pedestrians, and you have just hubs for mass public transit for people to get to where they need to go. And that also means that there is a diminished amount of people using cars, using, and you look, electric vehicles can also still contribute to climate change because of what they do, and what you have to mine to get them in order to, use them. So having mass public transit will actually curb in a significant way our, emissions that we have that go um into the air that causes, climate change. But you also got to remember, and I forget to mention, yes, I talked about the auto insurance companies, the car companies, the car part repair, companies, but also the same companies that also help create the roads that pave, the companies that pave the roads, the companies that actually make the asphalt and the tar. These companies also, they also are influential because they also want to keep these things going so that they can continue to make profits. And let's put it out there, the people who also make car seats, because they want you to have individual cars, because if you don't need car seats, because how many kids do you see using a car seat on a subway or a bus? Not too much. I mean, they may use a carrier, for the baby, but once a kid gets a certain age, you just sit them down in the seat, or or you sit them on your lap. You don't necessarily carry them, or you can just keep them in a stroller, right? So even when it comes to these, like, even like companies like Greco that make, you know, baby carriers, car seats, if we did more mass public transit, their sales would go down too. I can talk about, this is also in my mind because I'm about to become a great uncle. But that's the thing. People, don't think about things like this, but mass public transit would also diminish a lot, you know? The tire repair shops. How many people want to buy rims? you know, if we have more mass public transit and people are driving less, you know, it also, cities would hate it too. You want to know why? Less tickets. Tow truck companies would hate it. Less cars to have to tow. They get to tow. So there's so many moving parts that do not want people to have mass public transit, because that means a diminishing of their profits. So many people will be like, well, what about the jobs? And I'm like, what about the jobs? Let's do a just transition for a lot of these people into different industries. But yeah, let's make cars more obsolete. The only reason I see cars for is for the people who live in rural areas, that, especially on farms and stuff like that. That's the only, reason I see for them, for the most part. Maybe some people who need an independent car because of different needs regarding disability. But other than that, we really should have more of a pedestrian mass public transit centered society. But that's just my opinion. But yeah, this is the part where, Michael Parenti is actually talking about. So he's not necessarily pointing to the individual, I don't think, regarding, things like this. But yeah. And so even when you're talking about corporate media, you even have to look at the meteorologists with a side eye. Isn't that wild? Aren't they scientists? But you even sometimes have to look at them with a side eye. And so it's just like, man, damn, right? But yeah, that's corporate media for you. Sometimes they just, it's all about the Benjamins, baby. Anywho, I want to thank everybody for watching. And because this was a short episode, in a few hours, the next episode will be uploaded for Dirty Truths by Michael Parenti. The next part is chapter 2, part 7. And this is the last part in chapter 2. And this one is called, some call it censorship. So this is going to be talking about censorship within corporate media. This is also going to be good. I want you guys to keep in mind when that reading comes out, about how Parenti and Chomsky shake hands with each other in regards to talking about manufacturing consent in media. So I want you guys to also consider that. But what are your thoughts about the news and the media, um, you know, and how they skew it towards a more corporate lens? They report the weather on a more through a more corporate lens, or a corporate veneer. What are your thoughts? And have you really observed this in your local reporting? for weather as well as national reporting. Have you noticed it on, the ABC, the NBC, the CBS, the CNNs, the MSNBCs, the Fox News? Have you noticed that? Have you noticed it on the Weather Channel? Like, have you seen this? Let's talk about it, in the comments as well, because I think this is something that a lot of people really don't notice. But then once you hear it, it's like, oh, snap, that's true. So, yeah. So thank you so much for everybody watching. Thank you to everyone who has contributed to my Patreon and coffee. And look, water your plants, water yourselves, leave the world better than you found it. Reading is fundamental. Hey, and if you need to smoke it when you got it while reading, go ahead. Blow that smoke, yeah, baby. All right. Reading is fundamental, yeah.